Pregnant waitress was fired for helping Keanu Reeves. Next day, her life changed forever. The warm scent of coffee and grilled food hung in the air, mixing with the faint hum of an old radio playing from the kitchen. It was nearly closing time, but for Jessica, the shift felt like it had no end. She wiped the sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand, balancing a tray full of dirty plates as she maneuvered through the cramped aisle between tables. Her swollen feet ached, her back screamed for relief, but she pressed on, just as she had every single day for the past 6 months. Her worn-out uniform stretched tightly over her growing belly, making it harder to move as quickly as she used to. She could feel the fabric sticking to her skin, damp from a mixture of sweat and exhaustion. The baby kicked gently, as if reminding her to slow down. But she couldn't afford that luxury. Not when rent was due. Not when bills were piling up on her tiny kitchen counter, each marked with a bright red past due stamp. Jessica dropped the tray onto the kitchen counter, exhaling sharply. "Long night?" Martha asked, flipping a burger on the greasy grill. The older woman, with graying curls tucked under her hairnet, had been working at the diner for over 20 years. She was the closest thing Jessica had to a real friend here. "Like every other night," Jessica muttered, stretching her aching lower back. "And I still have to take the bus home." Martha clicked her tongue, shaking her head. "You shouldn't be working this hard, sweetheart. You're gonna wear yourself out before that baby even gets here." Jessica forced a small smile. "Not like I have much of a choice, Martha." Martha sighed, scraping the grill with a metal spatula. "You know, when I had my first, I was working double shifts too. Thought I had to do it all alone. Turns out, stressing myself half to death didn't do me any favors." Jessica leaned against the counter, rubbing her belly absent-mindedly. "I get it, but I gotta keep going. I don't want to fall behind on rent. My landlord's already breathing down my neck. I'm one late payment away from sleeping in a shelter." Martha set the spatula down, her face softening. "That ain't right." Jessica just shrugged. It was what it was. Across the diner, Ashley leaned against the counter, lazily scrolling through her phone. The blonde waitress had been there almost as long as Jessica, but unlike Jessica, she always managed to avoid the worst shifts. "You know, Jess," Ashley called out, not even looking up from her screen, "maybe if you flirted a little more, you'd get better tips. Guys love a pregnant woman. It's like a weird thing they have." Jessica's stomach churned. She bit the inside of her cheek, refusing to engage. Ashley smirked. "Oh, come on. Lighten up. I mean, it's not like you got a man to come home to anyway. Might as well milk it while you can." Martha shot Ashley a glare. "Mind your business, girl. Not everyone's looking to make money the same way you do." Ashley rolled her eyes and went back to her phone. Jessica inhaled deeply, pushing down the urge to snap. There was no point. Ashley had always been that way. Arrogant, rude, always trying to put others down to make herself feel bigger. She thought working at this rundown diner made her better than people. Jessica, on the other hand, didn't have time to care about egos. All she cared about was making it through the next shift, the next paycheck, the next month. Her hands absent-mindedly traced the curve of her belly as she thought about her grandmother. She used to dream of opening a little cafe, a warm, cozy place with handwritten menus and fresh-baked bread. Just like her grandmother's kitchen used to be. She could almost hear the old woman's voice in her head. "You got magic in your hands, baby girl. Ain't nobody else can make food with love like you do." Jessica smiled to herself for a brief moment before reality pulled her back. That dream felt so far away now. She barely had enough to survive, let alone open a business. As if on cue, the front bell chimed, signaling a new customer. A gust of cold air followed as the door swung open, sending a brief shiver through the room before settling again. Jessica barely noticed at first. Her hands were full, balancing a tray of dishes as she made her way back toward the kitchen. But then she caught sight of him, just as he slipped into a booth by the window, moving with the quiet ease of someone who didn't want to be noticed. He wasn't dressed like the typical customers who came in late at night. No polished shoes, no tailored suits, no flashy accessories. Just a worn leather jacket over a simple gray t-shirt, a pair of faded jeans, and shoes that had seen better days. His dark hair was slightly tousled, as if he'd been walking for a while, and there was something in his expression, something tired, almost distant. Most of the customers barely glanced his way, too caught up in their own meals and conversations. But Ashley, she noticed him immediately. "Well, look at that," she murmured under her breath. "Guess we got ourselves a wanderer." The other waitress barely spared him a glance before returning to counting her tips. "Just take his order, Ash." Ashley scoffed but grabbed a menu, flipping her blonde hair over her shoulder as she strutted toward the booth, her heels clicking against the old tile floor. "You lost, buddy?" The man looked up, and for a split second, there was a flicker of recognition in Jessica's chest. She knew that face. Everyone did. But he didn't carry himself the way most celebrities did. He wasn't looking for attention. Wasn't expecting it. He just sat there, calm, patient, waiting. If he was surprised by Ashley's tone, he didn't show it. Instead, he simply shook his head. No, just looking for a quiet meal. His voice was low, even, steady. Ashley let out a little laugh, crossing her arms. Right, a quiet meal. She glanced around the diner dramatically, then back at him. You sure you can afford to eat here? We're not a charity, you know. Jessica felt her breath catch. The booth next to his fell silent. A few of the regulars looked up from their plates, eyes darting between Ashley and the man sitting in front of her. The air shifted, thicker, uncomfortable. The man blinked, as if processing her words. Then, he smiled, small, barely there. I think I'll manage, he said simply. Ashley wasn't done. I just want to make sure. We got some pretty expensive stuff on the menu. Don't want any surprises when the check comes. Jessica felt the tray in her hands wobble slightly. She set it down carefully before she did something stupid, like throwing it at Ashley's head. The man didn't argue, didn't snap back. He just nodded slowly, as if he had all the patience in the world. I appreciate the concern, he said, still calm. Can I get a coffee? Black, and maybe a slice of pie, whatever you have left. Ashley raised an eyebrow. That's it? That's it. She made a face, shaking her head as she scribbled it down. Sure, your call. As she turned on her heel, she muttered under her breath, loud enough for the nearby customers to hear. Bet he's gonna run the second he sees the bill. Jessica clenched her jaw, fingers curling into her apron. Enough. She grabbed a coffee cup and poured, keeping her movements steady. As Ashley brushed past, Jessica didn't even look at her. She just stepped forward, tray in hand, and made her way toward the booth with a practiced smile, and placed the steaming cup of coffee in front of the man carefully. Here you go, she said, her voice warm despite the tension in the air, and I'll grab that pie for you in just a sec. He looked up, and for the first time, their eyes met. He had kind eyes, thoughtful, and a little tired, as if he had carried more weight than he let on. Thank you, he said simply, his voice low but sincere. Jessica nodded, stepping away to fetch the pie, ignoring Ashley's pointed glare from behind the counter. She could feel it. The heat of her judgment, the unspoken words practically dripping from her smirk. Ashley leaned against the register, arms crossed, her nails tapping against her arm. You really have a thing for playing the hero, huh? She muttered, just loud enough for Jessica to hear. Jessica didn't pause. She slid the last slice of apple pie onto a plate, grabbed a fork, and turned back to the booth. A customer is a customer, she said over her shoulder. It doesn't matter what they wear. Ashley scoffed. Oh, please. Don't act like you're some noble saint. You know how this works. Rich folks tip big, broke ones don't. That's just facts. Jessica placed the pie in front of the man, setting the fork beside it gently. She ignored Ashley's words, though her jaw clenched slightly. He glanced up again, observing quietly. He hadn't reacted to Ashley's taunts. Instead, he simply picked up the fork, running his thumb absently along the handle, before looking toward Jessica. You always this nice? He asked, his tone light but genuine. Jessica gave a small shrug. Just doing my job. From behind the counter, Ashley let out an exaggerated sigh. God, it must be exhausting being you, she muttered, shaking her head. Jessica ignored her, but the man didn't. He took a slow sip of his coffee, glancing around the diner subtly, taking everything in, and then he looked back at Ashley. She was still leaning against the counter, staring at her nails, clearly uninterested in working. Jessica, meanwhile, had already moved on to the next table, refilling a man's coffee cup with the same care as before. Keanu set his fork down gently. You don't seem to like your job very much, he said casually, breaking the silence. Ashley blinked, caught off guard. Excuse me. He tilted his head slightly. You don't look like someone who enjoys working here, he said, gesturing faintly toward the counter. Seems like a pretty nice place. Decent food, good people, but you look bored. Ashley forced a laugh, shaking her head. Pfft, yeah, okay. Like I'm gonna take life advice from some guy eating $2 pie in a place like this. Keanu just nodded slowly, as if that answer confirmed something for him. Then he picked up his fork again and took a bite of the pie, chewing thoughtfully. Jessica saw the way his expression shifted slightly, the smallest lift of his brows, the subtle nod of appreciation. This is good, he said, glancing toward her. Jessica smiled. Martha makes a mean pie. He nodded, glancing back toward the kitchen, where Martha was flipping a burger, muttering something under her breath about an order that had been sitting too long. You know, Ashley said suddenly, crossing her arms tighter, I don't get people like you. Keanu looked up, raising an eyebrow. People like me? Yeah, she said, shrugging. Rich people who try to act all normal. Like, what's the deal? You want to connect with the common folk? Feel humble for a night? That it? Jessica had had enough. She turned, hands on her hips, fixing Ashley with a sharp look. Can you stop? Ashley scoffed. What? Jessica shook her head. Just stop. Let him eat. Ashley huffed, rolling her eyes again, But she didn't argue this time. Instead, she grabbed a tray and made a show of finally doing her actual job, stalking off toward another table. Jessica exhaled slowly. Keanu watched her for a moment. Then, he picked up his fork again, cutting into the pie, as if nothing had happened. But something had. Jessica had barely taken 2 steps back toward the counter when she heard the heavy footsteps, the unmistakable sound of dress shoes tapping against the tile floor with authority. Mr. Donovan. Her stomach clenched before she even turned around. He moved like he owned the place, which of course he did. A man in his late 50s with a thick build, slicked back graying hair, and a permanent look of disapproval. Mr. Donovan wasn't the kind of boss who got involved unless there was money at stake. He didn't care about the staff. He didn't care about the customers. He only cared about what made him look good. And right now, he did not look happy. Ashley was right at his side, whispering something hurriedly, her voice laced with exaggerated offense. Jessica caught bits and pieces. Embarrassed me. Yelling in front of customers. Picking fights. Jessica clenched her jaw. Of course she was twisting the story. Donovan's gaze landed on her, cold and sharp. "Jessica," he barked, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. She straightened her shoulders, bracing herself. "Yes, sir." He took a step closer, his expression hard. "Do you mind telling me why the hell I just got pulled from my office to hear about you harassing customers?" Jessica's lips parted slightly. "Excuse me." Ashley folded her arms, tilting her head smugly. "She made a scene," she chimed in. "She got all defensive over some guy and started snapping at me in front of everyone." Jessica inhaled deeply through her nose. "That's not what happened." Donovan lifted a hand, cutting her off. "I don't care what happened," he snapped. "I care about what my staff is doing to my business. And right now, I've got a waitress making a fool of herself in front of paying customers." Jessica felt her fingers curl into fists at her sides, but she forced herself to stay calm. "Sir, all I did was treat a customer with respect." Ashley was the one making comments. Ashley scoffed. "Oh, please don't act like some hero, Jess. You lost it because I told the truth." Jessica turned to her, fire flashing in her eyes. "No, you lost it because I wouldn't let you humiliate someone just because you felt like it." The diner had gone quiet. Even the regulars, the ones who usually kept their heads down, were watching now. Donovan let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "Oh, so now you're in charge?" Jessica swallowed hard. "No, but nothing," he cut in. His voice dropped lower, but it was no less threatening. "You don't run this place. You don't get to decide how things are done here. You're an employee. And if you don't like the way I handle my business, then maybe you don't belong here at all." Her breath caught in her throat. For a moment, she thought she had misheard, but then he said it again, louder, slower, letting each word sink in like a weight pressing down on her chest. "You think this is your business?" His lips curled into a sneer. "If you don't like how we do things, then you can leave." Jessica felt the blood drain from her face. No, not like this. She couldn't afford to lose this job, not when her baby was due in 2 months. She forced herself to keep her voice even. "Sir, please, I wasn't trying to cause trouble. I was just—" "Save it," Donovan snapped. "I don't need excuses. I need employees who know how to keep their mouths shut and do their damn jobs. And clearly, that's not you." This was it. He was really doing it. Right there in front of everyone. "You're fired." The words hit harder than she expected, knocking the air from her lungs. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. She was frozen, standing there in the middle of the diner, her apron still tied around her waist, her hands shaking slightly at her sides. Ashley smirked. Jessica felt humiliation rise in her throat, hot and bitter. The chair scraped against the floor. Jessica barely had time to register the movement before Keanu stood up. His presence, calm and steady, suddenly felt heavier in the silence. All eyes turned to him. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out his wallet. He flipped it open, casually taking out several crisp bills and placing them on the table. More than enough to cover his coffee. More than enough to cover her last shift. "If it's about the money," Keanu said smoothly, "I can pay for her time." His voice wasn't loud, but it carried. It wasn't forceful, but it was firm. Donovan turned to him, his brows furrowing. "Excuse me?" Keanu tucked his wallet back into his pocket, his expression unreadable. "If you're firing her over this, then let me make sure she's compensated for whatever you think she's done wrong." Donovan's lip curled in disgust. "I don't need some big-shot celebrity coming in here and telling me how to run my place," he snapped. "I don't give a damn who you are. This is my business, and she's not welcome here anymore." Jessica felt the finality of it hit her like a slap. It was over. She sucked in a shaky breath, blinking back the burning in her eyes. Keanu didn't argue. He just nodded slowly, as if taking in the moment, as if understanding something deeper than what had been said. Then he turned to Jessica. She met his gaze, her throat tight. "Thank you for your kindness," he said quietly. Jessica swallowed. It was just the right thing to do. His lips quirked up at the corner, almost like he wanted to say something else, but instead, he just nodded. She turned, untying her apron with trembling fingers, and then without another word, Jessica stepped out into the cold night air, the door of the diner slamming shut behind her with a finality that made her heart sink deeper into her chest. She stood there for a moment, frozen, arms wrapped tightly around herself, as if she could somehow hold in the overwhelming rush of emotions clawing at her throat. The second Donovan had stormed out, she had felt the ground shift beneath her feet, but knowing didn't make it any easier. Her breath came out in short, unsteady bursts as she took her first step, then another, until she was moving, one foot in front of the other, away from the place that had been her only source of income, away from the humiliation, away from the people who had watched her get tossed out like she was nothing. She walked past dimly lit storefronts, past alleyways where streetlights buzzed and flickered, past strangers who barely spared her a glance. The ache in her lower back pulsed with every step, the weight of her belly making it harder to move as quickly as she wanted. She wished she could disappear. Her baby kicked, a small, fluttering movement against her ribs, as if reminding her that she wasn't alone. She cradled her belly, swallowing down the sob that threatened to break free. I know, sweetheart. I promise. I'll find a way. She didn't know how. She had no plan, no backup, no idea what she was going to do. By the time she reached her apartment, her fingers were numb from the cold, her face damp from the quiet tears that had finally slipped free somewhere between the diner and home. She fumbled with the keys, her breath hitching as she finally pushed the door open, stepping into the tiny space she called home. It was dark and quiet, the only sound the faint hum of the old refrigerator in the corner. She shut the door behind her, pressing her back against it, and let the weight of everything crash down all at once. Her hands covered her face as a choked sob escaped her lips. She slid down to the floor, pulling her knees up as best as she could, her stomach making it difficult to curl into herself the way she wanted. The apartment was cold, too cold, but she hadn't been able to afford the heating bill last month. Her gaze drifted to the small stack of envelopes on the counter. Rent overdue, utilities past due, a hospital bill she hadn't even opened yet because she knew she couldn't afford to look at the number inside. Her baby kicked again, a little stronger this time. Keanu stood outside the diner, his hands tucked into the pockets of his jacket, his gaze following Jessica as she disappeared down the street. He had stayed back, watching as she had pulled her coat tighter around herself, shoulders hunched, as if the weight of the world had settled onto her back and refused to let go, watching the way she held her belly, protective, gentle, even in her lowest moment. She hadn't even looked back. Keanu exhaled slowly. He could still hear the murmur of voices inside the diner, the forced laughter from Ashley, who had probably already forgotten the damage she had done. His jaw tightened. He reached into his pocket, pulling out his phone. The screen lit up against the darkness. He scrolled through his contacts, then pressed call. It rang twice before a voice answered. "Hey, it's me," Keanu said, his voice low. There was a pause. "Everything all right?" He glanced once more down the street, where Jessica had disappeared into the night. "I need you to look into something for me." Jessica stood outside the diner, staring at the door like it was the last place on earth she wanted to be. She should have just let it go, should have walked away and never looked back, but she needed her last paycheck. She had rent due in 3 days, groceries barely lasting through the week. She didn't have the luxury of pride. With a deep breath, she squared her shoulders and stepped inside. The familiar sounds of clinking plates and murmured conversations hummed around her. But something was different. It was subtle, just a shift in the way people glanced at her before quickly looking away, like they had all witnessed her being thrown out last night and didn't want to be caught staring too long. Jessica swallowed hard, keeping her head high as she made her way toward the counter. Ashley was already there, leaning lazily against the register. Well, look who crawled back," Ashley said, smirking as she folded her arms. "Miss High and Mighty finally realized she needs her last few dollars, huh?" Jessica ignored the sting in her words. She wasn't here to argue. "I just came for my paycheck," she said evenly, refusing to let her voice waver. Ashley made a show of pretending to think, tapping a finger against her chin. You sure you don't want to apply for your old job while you're at it?" She gave a dramatic sigh. "Oh wait, never mind. Donovan made it real clear you're not welcome here anymore." Jessica clenched her jaw. Ashley grinned, clearly enjoying herself. "Maybe you can try one of those burger places. I hear they don't mind hiring people who can't keep their mouths shut." A few customers snickered from their booths. Jessica felt the heat rise in her cheeks, but she bit down on the inside of her cheek, refusing to give Ashley the satisfaction of a reaction. She took a steady breath. "Can I just get my check?" Ashley rolled her eyes. Yeah, hold on." She turned toward the back, lazily strolling to the office where Donovan kept the paychecks locked up. Jessica exhaled slowly, willing herself to stay calm, to just take the money and get out of there. But then, the diner went silent. Not just quiet, silent. Jessica frowned, her stomach twisting as she turned around. And then, she saw him, Keanu Reeves. But this time, he wasn't alone. He walked in with quiet confidence. Behind him, a group of men and women followed, dressed in sharp suits, polished shoes, their expressions unreadable. Business associates, legal team, people who didn't belong in a place like Benny's Diner. Ashley had frozen in place, still holding the door to the back office open. Her smirk had disappeared, replaced by confusion, then something closer to panic. Keanu didn't stop at the entrance. He kept walking, his gaze steady, focused. He moved like he had a purpose, like he was here for something specific. And then, he looked directly at Donovan. The older man had just stepped out from the kitchen, a coffee cup in hand, clearly not expecting the sudden shift in atmosphere. His brows furrowed as he took in the sight of the sharply dressed team behind Keanu, the weight of their presence sinking into the room like a storm cloud. "Mr. Donovan," Keanu said, his voice calm but firm. Donovan blinked. "What?" He cleared his throat, straightening his shoulders. "What can I do for you?" Keanu didn't answer right away. Instead, he took a slow glance around the diner, letting the silence stretch, letting the moment settle. His gaze landed on Jessica just for a beat, before turning back to Donovan. "I'm here to discuss ownership," Keanu said simply. A few gasps rippled through the diner. Ashley let out a nervous laugh. I'm sorry, what?" Jessica stood there, heart pounding so hard she swore the whole room could hear it. "You can't be serious," Donovan finally muttered, flipping through the papers in front of him, like he could somehow change what they said. His face had gone pale, his usual bravado gone, replaced with something like fear. This isn't real. I didn't agree to this." One of the suited men beside Keanu cleared his throat, adjusting his tie. "The transaction was completed this morning, Mr. Donovan. Your lawyers reviewed the contract. You signed the final paperwork." Keanu watched him calmly, his expression unreadable. "You should have read the fine print." Ashley let out a half laugh, half scoff, stepping closer to Donovan like she expected him to fix this. "Okay, no, this is ridiculous. You can't just walk in here and take over. That's not how this works." Keanu turned his head slightly, his gaze shifting to her now. It wasn't cruel, wasn't angry, but there was something in his eyes that made Ashley take half a step back, like she had finally realized she was standing on shaky ground. "Actually," Keanu said, his voice smooth, unbothered, "that's exactly how it works." Ashley blinked, her mouth opening, then closing again. Donovan's face twisted in frustration. He slammed a hand down on the counter, the sound making a few people flinch. "This is my business." Keanu didn't react. "Not anymore." The words landed like a final blow. Jessica felt the breath hitch in her throat. She couldn't believe what she was witnessing. Keanu Reeves, the Keanu Reeves, had just walked into the diner she got fired from, and in the span of minutes, bought the whole place out from under the man who had thrown her out like trash. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. Donovan still wasn't letting go. He shoved the papers back toward Keanu's legal team. "This is a joke," he spat. "You think you can just take over and fire me? This is my life. You're fired." Keanu said it so simply, so casually, like it wasn't even a question, like it was just a fact. Ashley's laugh came out high and forced. "Oh my God, you're insane." She shook her head, folding her arms. "You don't know how this place works. You don't know how to run a diner. You're gonna need people who actually know what they're doing. You can't fire both of us and expect this place to survive." Keanu's lips twitched in something close to amusement. "You're right." Ashley's smirk returned. "Exactly. You need us." Keanu tilted his head. "No, I need people who deserve to be here." Ashley's face fell. "You don't," Keanu continued, his voice firm, but not cruel. "And neither does he." Ashley's whole body stiffened. She glanced at Donovan, waiting for him to say something, to fix this, to do something, but the man was still standing there, speechless, flipping through the papers like he could make them disappear if he stared hard enough. Keanu took a slow step forward, looking at her directly. "You're fired." The words hit like a slap. Ashley opened her mouth to argue, but nothing came out. The diner was still silent. No one stood up for her. Not a single customer protested. No one whispered that it was unfair, because it wasn't. Ashley had spent years looking down on people, humiliating customers, treating her coworkers like they were beneath her. And now, everyone was watching her finally get what she deserved. She let out a hollow laugh, shaking her head. "You're making a mistake." Keanu didn't answer. Ashley's jaw clenched, and for a moment, it looked like she might keep fighting. But then something in her face shifted. Realization. There was nothing she could do. So she huffed out a breath, grabbed her bag, and stormed out. The moment the door swung shut behind her, it was like the diner let out a collective breath. The tension hadn't disappeared, but something about the air felt different now, lighter. Jessica still hadn't moved. She wasn't sure she even could. And then, Keanu turned to her. She felt her entire body go still. His expression softened as he looked at her. "I saw what you did," Keanu said quietly. "You stood up for what's right. People like you deserve a chance." "I don't," she started, shaking her head. "I don't understand." Keanu took a step closer, his tone warm, steady. "I want you to stay." Jessica's breath hitched. He smiled just slightly. "You'd make a great manager." Her lips parted, but no words came out. She barely registered the small gasps from the customers, the way a few people exchanged glances, the way Martha, who had been peeking out from the kitchen, actually dropped a spatula onto the floor. Jessica shook her head again, a stunned, disbelieving laugh escaping her lips. "Are you serious?" Keanu's eyes crinkled slightly at the corners. "Very." Jessica felt something deep in her chest crack wide open. Her breath shuddered as the tears came before she could stop them, spilling down her cheeks, hot and unstoppable. I don't know what to say," she choked out. Keanu's smile deepened, the warmth in his expression steady, patient. "You don't have to say anything." Jessica pressed a hand over her mouth, trying to steady herself, but it was useless. She burst into tears right there in front of him, in front of everyone, and for the first time in what felt like forever. They weren't from pain, they weren't from fear, they were from relief. Pure, overwhelming, beautiful relief. She wasn't alone, she wasn't lost, she had a chance. And for the first time in a long, long time, she believed she could take it. The days that followed felt like a dream, one Jessica was afraid to wake up from. She kept expecting reality to come crashing back down. Maybe Donovan would find some loophole in the paperwork. Maybe Keanu would realize she wasn't qualified. Maybe she'd show up for work one morning and be told it had all been a mistake. But every day she walked through those diner doors, and every day Keanu was still there, still treating her with the same quiet respect, the same patience, like he knew she was still trying to wrap her head around everything. And he wasn't just giving her a job. He was teaching her. He'd stay after hours, sitting in one of the booths with a cup of coffee, walking her through basic management skills, how to balance inventory, how to schedule shifts fairly, how to handle customer complaints without losing her mind. He explained numbers and budgeting in a way that actually made sense, something no other boss had ever bothered to do. "You don't just want to work in a restaurant," he had said one night, stirring his coffee absent-mindedly. "You want to run one." Jessica had stared at him, blinking. "How do you talk about food like it's more than just a job," Keanu said, offering a small smile. "I see it when you talk about your grandma's recipes, the way your face changes. You don't just work for a paycheck, Jessica. You care about it." And she did. God, she did. It was terrifying how much she cared, how much she had always cared, but she had spent so long just trying to survive that the dream of owning her own cafe had become nothing more than a distant fantasy. But now, Keanu was making her think about it. He wasn't just helping her keep a job, he was helping her build something bigger. Within a week, she was enrolled in a culinary and business training program, fully paid for. She had argued about that part, had tried to insist that she would find a way to cover it herself, but Keanu had waved her off with an easy shrug. "Call it an investment," he had said. She didn't know what to say to that, so she just swallowed the lump in her throat and nodded. The classes were tough, but she loved them. She spent her mornings at the training center, learning everything from proper knife skills to the intricacies of restaurant financing, and then spent her evenings back at the diner, putting it all into practice. Keanu made sure she had time for both, adjusting her schedule so she could juggle work and school without drowning in exhaustion. "You're going to be great at this," he told her one night, after watching her successfully handle a difficult customer without breaking a sweat. Jessica smiled, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "I don't know. I still feel like I have a long way to go." He nodded. "You do," she laughed. "Thanks for the confidence boost." Keanu grinned. "I mean it in the best way. You should have a long way to go. It means you're growing." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the counter. "The moment you think you have nothing left to learn is the moment you stop being great." Jessica exhaled, letting his words sink in. Maybe she could do this. But of course things couldn't be too perfect. Ashley had not taken her firing well. Jessica had expected her to move on, find another job, maybe land at another diner where she could torment some other poor waitress. But no, Ashley had a vendetta, and she was determined to make Jessica pay. The first rumor reached Jessica one afternoon when she overheard two servers from another restaurant talking outside the back entrance. "I heard she only got the job because she cried in front of him." "No way, seriously?" "Yeah, apparently Keanu Reeves just felt bad for her and decided to adopt her or something." Jessica's stomach turned. She stepped out, making sure her footsteps were loud enough for them to hear. The two waitresses flinched when they saw her, their conversation dying instantly. Jessica didn't say anything. She just gave them a slow, steady look before walking past. She already knew where this was coming from. Ashley. A few days later it got worse. She overheard one of the new hires muttering under his breath as he stacked plates in the back. "I mean, she's great and all, but let's be real. She's way too emotional for this business. She cried on her first day." Keanu heard about it before Jessica even had the chance to tell him. One evening he waited until closing. He called Jessica into the office. She hesitated in the doorway. "Did I do something wrong?" Keanu shook his head. "No." He gestured for her to sit. "I just wanted to check in. Have you been hearing the things people are saying? Jessica stiffened. She swallowed, trying to play it off. It's nothing. Just rumors. Keanu tilted his head. Rumors that you're too emotional? That you only got this job because I felt bad for you? Jessica's face flushed. She looked down at her hands. Keanu exhaled softly. You know that's not true, right? Her throat tightened. She nodded. I'm going to make something very clear, he said, his voice steady. No one is going to take this opportunity from you. Not Ashley, not some jealous co-workers. No one. You earned this. Keanu nodded toward her hands. You care about this place, about food, about making people feel welcomed. That's why you're here. That's why you're going to succeed. And that's why Ashley's words don't mean a damn thing. Jessica swallowed hard, her vision blurring slightly. Keanu smiled. So don't let them get to you. Jessica wiped at her eyes quickly, laughing softly. God, I'm too emotional. Keanu chuckled. Nah, you're just human. The day she worked hard for had finally arrived. Jessica stood behind the counter, wiping her hands on her apron as she took a deep breath, letting the moment settle around her. The cafe was alive, buzzing with energy. This was it, her dream. The cafe had opened just 2 hours ago, and already it was packed. Her cafe. She had named it Lena's Kitchen, after her grandmother, the woman who had taught her how to cook, how to pour love into food, how to find comfort in a warm meal, even when life was hard. It was more than just a restaurant. It was a place where people could come in, sit down, and feel like they belonged. And it wasn't just customers coming in. It was familiar faces. Some of the regulars from the diner, the ones who had seen her fired that night, had walked through the doors of Lena's Kitchen with proud smiles, ordering slices of pie just like they had at Benny's. Even Martha had shown up, already fussing about the way the bread was being stored, as if she hadn't already retired and wasn't technically part of the staff. Jessica had hired struggling single mothers, just like her, women who needed a second chance. Women who had been overlooked, who had been dismissed the way she once had. She knew what it was like to be desperate, to be terrified of not having enough to survive, and she swore that no one who worked for her would ever feel like they were just disposable. The front door swung open, and for a split second, the noise of the street outside filtered in before it closed again. Jessica looked up just in time to see Keanu Reeves stepping inside. She had seen him so many times over the past few months, had worked beside him, learned from him, but somehow, it still got her every time. He smiled when he saw her, giving a small nod before looking around the cafe, taking in the packed tables, the happy faces, the warmth of the space. Wow, he said, slipping his sunglasses off. Not bad, boss. Jessica let out a breathless laugh, shaking her head. I still can't believe this is real. Keanu tucked his glasses into his jacket pocket, giving her a knowing look. Believe it. She opened her mouth to say something else, but then a sharp pain shot through her stomach. She inhaled sharply, gripping the edge of the counter as a sudden pressure radiated through her lower back. Keanu noticed immediately. His expression shifted, his body tensing as he took a small step forward. Jessica? She exhaled, forcing a laugh, waving him off. I'm fine, just another wave of pain hit, harder this time, stealing her breath. Martha, who had been behind the counter, froze. Oh, honey, she breathed, her eyes widening. Is it time? Jessica shook her head quickly. No, I still have a few weeks left. But even as she said it, she knew this wasn't some random ache. This wasn't exhaustion. Another contraction rolled through her, and suddenly, panic kicked in. Her water broke. Right there, in the middle of her cafe, standing behind the counter of the place she had built from the ground up, Jessica was going into labor. People started moving, voices overlapping, a rush of motion and sound that made it hard to focus. Martha was yelling something about boiling water, which made no sense, while one of the waitresses ran to grab her bag. Someone called for a cab, but Keanu was already shaking his head, reaching for his phone. No time, he muttered, already dialing. Jessica squeezed her eyes shut, clutching the counter as another contraction hit. I can't have the baby here. Keanu tucked his phone back into his pocket and scooped her up. Jessica barely had time to process what was happening before she was in his arms, being carried toward the door. Okay, this is not how I pictured my grand opening going, she muttered between gritted teeth. Keanu huffed a quiet laugh, adjusting his hold. Not exactly on the schedule, huh? The cafe erupted into cheers and applause as he carried her outside. Jessica could barely breathe through the pain, but she still managed to glare at Martha, who was practically beaming as she followed them out. Don't you dare take pictures! Martha ignored her completely, already snapping a few shots with her phone. Keanu got her into the back seat of his car, because of course he wasn't waiting for a cab. Of course he was going to take her himself. He climbed into the driver's seat, checking the mirror before glancing back at her. You okay? Jessica let out a sharp breath. I'm about to have a baby in your car, Keanu. I am not okay. He turned the key in the ignition. All right, let's get you to the hospital before I have to add delivering babies to my resume. The car sped off, weaving through traffic. Keanu surprisingly calm despite the fact that Jessica was gripping the seat like she was ready to rip it apart. She could barely process what was happening. 1 second, she had been opening her cafe, and now she was on her way to give birth. It felt overwhelming. Too fast. Too much. But then, Keanu's voice broke through the haze. You're gonna be fine, Jessica. She turned her head, meeting his steady gaze in the mirror. You've handled way worse than this, he said, the smallest smile playing at his lips. You've got this. And somehow, in the middle of all the chaos, she believed him. Hours later, in the bright, sterile light of the hospital, Jessica lay in a hospital bed, exhausted but glowing, holding her newborn son against her chest. He was perfect, tiny, warm, his little hands curled into fists as he nestled against her. Tears welled in her eyes as she traced a finger gently across his soft cheek. Hey there, baby boy. Keanu stood at the door, hands in his pockets, a rare, genuine smile on his face as he watched her. Martha was already bouncing up and down beside him. What's his name? Jessica exhaled softly, looking down at her son, her heart swelling in ways she didn't know were possible. Liam, she whispered. His name is Liam. Martha let out a happy sniffle, already wiping at her eyes. Oh, honey, that's perfect. Jessica looked up, meeting Keanu's gaze. Thank you, she said softly, for everything. Keanu gave a small nod. You did this, Jessica. I just gave you the space to make it happen. She smiled. The baby stirred slightly, letting out a tiny yawn, and Jessica swore her heart melted. Outside, the world kept moving. People passed by the hospital, cars honked, life continued. But in that moment, in that small, quiet space, everything had changed, because kindness had a way of coming full circle. Jessica had lost everything that night in the diner, and yet somehow, she had gained so much more. Would you have stood up for Keanu that night? Like, share, and comment your thoughts.